Mais je suis désolé, je parle en anglais, je suis pas assez bon en français. Just a first question. Who here is working on a project? Are you project managers or are you technical people? Who's here's technical? Mostly technical. Who's not put their hand up and not, what do you do?
I'm a CISO.
A CSO, okay, good. Well, welcome. So who wants to make the projects that they're responsible for or working on or supporting more successful? Put your hand up. Who doesn't want to make their projects more successful? Why haven't you put your hand up? Okay, and who wants to be more successful with the minimum amount of work and effort? Raise your hands and say yes. Tell me you're alive. Yes. Okay. Now, where might you be now? Well, perhaps you're worried that the way your customers buy things doesn't help you to help them to be more secure. Perhaps you're concerned your customers put a lot of work on you and ask you to produce paperwork that you know doesn't make the system more secure. In fact, I've seen some projects where the paperwork would fill this auditorium. But the Russians don't care how many certificates you've got. What matters is whether you're absolutely secure. And sometimes you've either had to put up with security people, or you've been a security person yourself, and you've been in the way of a project, or perceived to be such. And sometimes you've had a project where the security requirements have come so late in the project that it's too late to do anything about it. And then the project is stuck. Do you go ahead making something that you know is not secure enough to go out to the market or to be bought by your government supply contractor? Or do you have less capability? And perhaps, if you've ever done an OJU procurement, has anybody done a big procurement for a government or a railway or anything like that? Gone through the official journal of the European Union? No, nobody's done that. Well, those are the very biggest contracts. Now, we know though some of those are just one on price. So maybe you're concerned that actually security is just a drag on the business, that you're seen as something that's not important, a bolt-on. So where would you like to be? Well, imagine your company is comfortable that it's got its security under control. And envision that your customer believes that your security is under control, such the fact that he starts buying from you, that you start winning competitive tenders, your market share grows. Now imagine also, what if something goes wrong that's nobody's fault? Like a new 0 day is discovered, and you can work with your customer collaboratively, without a blame culture, to actually fix that problem dynamically as it occurs. And imagine that all the money that is spent on cybersecurity in your companies directly contributes to the profit of your organization. So how do you get from there to here? Well, I believe that's something called the Cyber Design Accelerator that puts secure by design at the beginning. But just to remind you all why this is so important now, we've had the second year now of Russia's illegal invasion of Ukraine. But what's less well known and less well reported is that cyber attacks have doubled in this case. The Microsoft Defense Digital Report for this year found that attacks on critical national infrastructure have increased from 40% to 80%. That's a doubling of critical national infrastructure. What do I mean by critical national infrastructure? I mean the stuff that keeps us alive. Food, water, power. How long can you go without water? Now, our adversaries are attacking the things that keep us alive. Now, they don't always go after governments directly. Sometimes they go after companies like yours. Obviously not your company, but a company like yours. And they say, this isn't a theoretical opportunity. We've seen the SolarWinds attack last year, in 2020. where the US government was attacked, we believe, by Russia, and critical secrets were lost. And far from the media image of this being something that is done by script kiddies in their underpants working from home and then going out driving Ferraris, actually, again, according to Microsoft, 90% of attacks emanating from Russia were on NATO countries. And what do I mean by NATO countries? I mean us in Europe and North America. So this threat is very real. Now, the other reason why this is important is that governments are responding to how this threat is working. And the traditional approach to security of having a security guy at the end, a QA-type person, approving your security, is no longer being exceptional. And in the UK, the government's moving to something called secure by design. And that means accreditation, as it's known in NATO countries and things like that, is being abolished. And if you want to sell something to the government in the UK, and I suspect before long across Europe, you will have to change the way you do security and the way you think about it, and implement what we call continuous risk management. Now, to illustrate this a bit better, I'm going to tell you a slight story. I'm going to take you to a nice part of England called the Cotswolds. It's nearly in the southwest of the country. It's full of very pretty villages. Who's visited, actually, the Cotswolds? Anybody or somebody at the back there? There you are. I recommend it. Full of very tiny villages, even smaller cottages, and all very well preserved. And in the middle of that is one of the UK's main cybersecurity hubs. And in contrast to these pretty buildings, it's enormous. It's about the size of this building here. The corridor takes 10 minutes to walk down from one end to the other. It's surrounded by armed guards and barbed wire. And it's February 2021. It's a beautiful day, clear blue skies. Now, Mark is walking down the corridor. Even though it's lockdown, it's deserted. So instead of it being like some Men in Black scene, where you go underground and it's full of activity, it's just deserted. It's just rows of empty desks. And there are signs everywhere saying, COVID, do you really need to be here? And yes, he does, because he knows at any minute there could be an attack on critical national infrastructure. The UK government could be embarrassed. International relations could be critically, irreparably damaged. People could even die as a direct result of this. So he has to go into the office. Now, Mark's quite young for a manager in defense. He's about 35. He has thick brown hair, a big bushy beard, and his hair is quite well kempt, as could be achieved in lockdown, because there were no barbers. That's actually the one advantage I had of being bald in lockdown. Hooray, I found an advantage of being bald. I didn't need to go to the barber so often as everybody else. But his hair is well kempt as it can be. And he has a friendly features on his face, brown eyes. And he goes to the only meeting room in this enormous office with somebody in it. And sitting opposite him is a lady, perhaps in her 60s. Now, she's very sensibly dressed, a white shirt, blouse, sensible trousers, and very tightly permed hair that you saw often in the 1970s. In fact, she looks a bit like Mrs. Doubtfire, or Madame Doubtfire, as you might call her over here. But this isn't Robin Williams dressed up as a transvestite being funny. She's running a multi-billion-pound critical network. Now, Veronica, thank you for seeing me today. And we're having this meeting because I'm really disappointed. There's problems that we've raised before still haven't been addressed. These are really important problems that we must resolve, particularly because of lockdown and all the increased activity on the network. Mark, I've got to tell you, you might think you're responsible for security, but I'm responsible for delivering a project on time and to budget. Veronica, but I'm trying to help you here. Security is an important part of your project planning. We need to get this involved in the business case. Security people don't get involved in business cases. And let me tell you this, everybody important in this organization agrees with me. And if you continue like this, this is not going to end well for you. So have you ever felt picked on for trying to do your job? Have you ever felt a spotlight arriving you and all your colleagues moving away as though you've suddenly become toxic in your organization simply because you were trying to make it more secure. Now, Mark doesn't need this. Hang on, sorry, wrong slide. He wants, like everybody else, he wants to survive in his organization. And he's super busy. He has a team of 30 people. And in the organization he works for, he has 5,000 projects or capabilities to keep secure. It's about 40 a day. Sometimes he feels like he's doing security by scrolling through Twitter. It's as deep and meaningful as that. Now, he knows that's not the right way to do security, but it's what his organization is asking him to do, and he doesn't want to be that man in the spotlight again. So he keeps on doing it. But actually, things don't just stay bad. Things get worse. Because as we know, the internet is becoming all more prevalent. There are no such thing anymore as capabilities that are disconnected from the internet. The air gap is broken. And he knows that these projects are coming back. So this network project that Veronica was working on, or Mrs. Doubtfire, comes across his desk again, and his shoulders sag, and he thinks, oh, I don't want to get involved in this argument again. The last time I felt a bit bullied. I'm not going to do this. And he comes over to me, George, what can we do? I come to these projects, and they treat security as a really important part of anything like in defense. So why do they treat me like I'm something to be avoided? Why do they avoid me to the very end until they need a certificate to say they're secure? And then when I can't give them a certificate at the end because they've made fundamental design decisions, then I get blamed for not making it secure. And Mark, why don't you give up your power of security accreditation? Why don't you stop being a bouncer and actually give up your authority over the rest of the organization? But George, that's the only power we've got. If we didn't give people security approval, nobody would be secure. But Mark, you just told me that your power doesn't work. You're like that guy in Tiananmen Square. I'm on the right slide now. Trying to stop a row of tanks with your body. And if these are big projects, multi-billion-pound projects in case of government, are you, as one security guy, ever going to stop that project? Really? Seriously? They don't even report to you. And Mark thinks, oh, yes, you're right. I'm never going to stop them. This is not the right way to stop the project. So what I suggest instead is that actually security becomes an enabler for the organization. So it deliberately takes away its authority and provides tools, people, and processes and guidance to be more secure. And that includes risk management. Now, the framework I suggest for doing this is called the Secure by Design Accelerator. Or the Cyber Design Accelerator, sorry. This includes 4 elements: risk management, agility, controls, and engineering. And this enables you to embed security in the beginning from projects. So the first element is risk management. Now, risk management is something that's often avoided, I find, by managers, especially in large organizations, because they regard it as an esoteric subject or something that's just, again, another thing that they don't really understand. So they avoid it. And what's the impact of that? Well, the impact is that critical risk can be carried without anybody actively managing them. So in the case of defense, you could have a missile coming towards you, and you're trying to press the button to stop that missile, to activate the air defense, and it's not working because people didn't do the risk management. Or if you're working in a private company, something entirely predictable, like a network goes down or a ransomware attacks, and it hasn't been managed effectively. So what I try and take my people through is what I call the practical preparation process. So this demystifies risk management. It includes 4 steps, really, just to look at what risk management is. And some of these steps ask really fundamental questions about the purpose of your project. And they're actually project management steps rather than cybersecurity steps. So they ask questions like, What's the purpose of your project? Now, I don't think I'm giving away any UK state secrets if I said that a lot of projects I've worked for are not clear on what their project was. One lady particularly told me my purpose is to get more money. No, what is the purpose of your project so that I can be a good security engineer and defend that purpose, not simply your ability to raise more money. So the practical preparation process does that. Another client I worked with, they actually saved £100 million by realizing that the value and the data they were carrying was contractually going to the wrong countries. They were sharing it with different countries where the security rules didn't allow that. And by getting that right at the beginning and identifying it as a risk, they were then able to successfully deliver that. The next thing is agility. Now in cyber, the world changes very quickly. But in old waterfall projects, projects don't change very quickly. So we often see lack of agility exhibited as things like patches that haven't been addressed for years. Old and clunky equipment that people are forced to use in big corporations. Has your company made you use stuff that's really old-fashioned compared with your personal phone? Or yes, exactly, yes. You can always tell somebody working for the government or something like that, they've got a computer from 10 years ago. In the UK, we were very proud to launch a new warship called HMS Elizabeth. And then the press noticed that in the brand new control room, there was Windows XP running, an operating system that was unpatchable and obsolete 10 years ago. So before even the warship was designed, somebody had specified something, and they'd lacked the agility to do it. Now, the core problem under here is the lack of governance and actually control and involvement from management. And so what the agility step does is puts an adaptive security monitor in place. And this allows corporate governance and managers to be involved in security better so that they can make the right decisions at the right time and actually stop embarrassing things like that going on, and quite often spend money more appropriately and adapt to change. Now, the next element is controls. Now, this is the bit that most people associate with security. Now, controls are the things that stop you doing what you want to do. They're also supposed to stop bad actors doing the things they want to do, but quite often we get the two mixed up. So we approach here the GEMS safeguarding monitor. So that's a way of actually combining traditional security controls, things like have you got your firewall up to date, have you made sure that everybody's been security cleared to go into a particular room, and then combining that with maturity measures that enable you to measure from a management point of view what it is. So actually, a security control is a technical thing, but a maturity model is a management thing. So have they documented what they're doing? Are they running around like really busy headless chickens doing things and actually feeling like they've got the world of the weight on their shoulders? Or is that process being effectively managed and worked out and iterated and worked out why we're doing things badly? So that's security controls. And finally, engineering. Now, engineering is the bit. Now, Carl Widerher, one of the founders of modern cybersecurity, has people heard of him? No? Okay, well, he's an American from the Institute of Cybersecurity over there. Now, he says that most cybersecurity is caused by poor engineering. Now, actually, what I'm trying to do out here is put myself out of a job, because if engineering was done well, I wouldn't be needed. And so, what we do here in cybersecurity is, rather than running around trying to fix all the holes all the time, actually design the system so the holes don't occur in the first place. And we have something called the Cyber GOAT framework, and that's goals, objectives, approaches, and techniques for actually making yourself more cyber secure. And again, it's a tool for managers to communicate better, and a lot of you said your technical staff. It's also a tool for you as technical to communicate better with your managers. And so actually say, for example, a manager might not understand what zero trust is, but they should be able to ask you whether you've got that in there. And say a manager might not know what deception is and how to implement that technically, but it's a very good question for anybody who's designing a system. Have I included deception in the design of my system? And if not, why not? And is it worth putting some budget against that objective? So overall, that's the approach that I take to make people's projects more successful and embed security in from the beginning. Now, just in the few minutes I've got left, I will dive in and perhaps in a bit more detail into this. So in the element here, in the process, I'll dive in a little bit deeper and look at value journeys. Now, value journeys are something, again, that sounds like something engineering. But people don't really know what it's called. In NIST, in fact, which is equivalent to ISO 27001 series on risk management, they call it the information lifecycle. And the information lifecycle is even more complicated. Well, what the hell does that mean? Well, I like to think of this as value, as things that are of value to you. It's quite simple. And the journey is how they move around your organization. Now, if you're a contracting authority or you're providing something to a customer, it's the customer's value. And how does that value go around, or how does your intellectual property move? Now, if you're organizing something like a very sad event last year, the value is quite obvious. It's on top of the box. You can see it. But actually, quite often people hide the value. And if you were organizing a really important funeral and somebody at the last moment told you some really important jewels were being put on top of the box and they're going on a slightly different journey to the coffin, would that make your job organizing it more difficult? Give me a nod if you're still with me. Yeah? Would it make, if you were forced nonetheless to go ahead with it, would it make the security of those jewels more at risk if you didn't have adequate warning that they were coming with you? Give me another nod. Yes. So that's common sense in project management. But when we get to technical projects, and defense is the worst at this, all that sort of logic goes out the window, and people think, well, it's also complicated. I don't need to be involved in that as a project manager. But this is still value. It's going on a journey. And it's not just at the moment of being fired. It's actually when it's being developed and actually brought into a position when you can use it. So when people are asked to do value journeys, well, that sounds a bit like a technical question. I'll go and ask an engineer. And an engineer comes back with something like a technical drawing. Now, this is a drawing of a Russian Sputnik rocket. Now, what this tells me is that guy's really clever. It doesn't really tell me, though, where the value is. And that's because the engineer is a really good person for telling you how something works, but he's not a good person to ask, usually, why you have a rocket. Why are we using it? Why are we buying 1,000 rockets or whatever? And so that's a bad example of looking at value and why people get put off by the subject. So what I recommend to engineers, and again, this is quite often, or project managers, and this is often difficult for engineers, is to think about the money, not the system. And you can still draw lines like it's a box when you're looking at systems. But actually, I worked with a torpedo, the one you saw just in the picture there. I said, well, what's your value journey if you're developing a torpedo? Well, first of all, they build the brains of the torpedo. That's the bit that's really secret and has all the intelligence that tracks enemy warships and things like that. And we really want to look after that. And then they build it in a factory, and then they assemble the motor and things like that. And that's virtually open source. You can go on the internet and you can work out how to build a torpedo. It's a pretty ancient technology from the Second World War. But it's also very dangerous and explosives and things like that. And then finally it goes to a customer. And there's a thing I mentioned earlier about the export customer. When they drew this simple diagram, they realized that the types of data they had, some of this was UK only, and here they had an export customer. So simply by drawing a picture of their contract structure and how they were delivering a project in commercial terms, enabled them to make a bit of a breakthrough in realizing they were setting themselves up for failure because they had designed a contract structure that required them to send data that was UK only to another country. Now, this was all written down, but it was only when they drew it that they had the breakthrough. Now, that was an afternoon's work and possibly saved the UK government £100 million. Now, I think that's a pretty good win for that. So I go through this with some customers. Bill Clinton popularized this phrase, called keep it simple, stupid, but I use it to mean when you're doing value journeys, keep it high level. So the big mistake I see engineers making is getting lost in the weeds of detail. So your value is something conceptual usually. You have to go up, not down in detail. You have to decide where your boundaries are. So again, basic project management. What is within scope of your project and what is not? And what problem are you trying to solve today? And then sometimes I get accused of being dogmatic in insisting that people draw pictures. But I really do find from experience that even though it's written down, people find real value from drawing it out and understanding it in that sense. And again, that's a way of making it high level. If you have a picture that looks like a Sputnik rocket, you're not doing it well. If you've got a picture with 3 boxes on it, now you're starting to understand your system. And finally, come up with scenarios. So I was working with a helicopter recently, and they said it's all super secure because it's in our compound and it's surrounded by armed guards. Well, yeah, that's great. It is secure there, but I'm not going to attack it there. I'm going to attack it when you're bringing equipment to the compound, or I'm going to attack it when you're on a mission, when you're not expecting me to do a cyber attack. So it's a scenario that's important for when data moves about, not just when it's in its quiescent state, securely packed away in its boxes. And that's a picture, finally, just to finish on, which shows that being deployed in a training environment. And so that's a summary of things. Thank you very much.
Normalement, ça doit fonctionner. Merci beaucoup. Merci, Georges Bathurst, avec vous. Si vous avez quelques questions pour terminer cette session masterclass, une première question peut-être? Monsieur?
Je vais la poser en anglais, du coup. Hi, sir. Just wanted to know, how do you introduce risk management to some private company who are going to answer you that they don't care about ransomware, and by the same token, they want to keep the security, but they say, if I lose it, well, I lose it. Kind of a anarchist type way of thinking, saying that their data I don't value.
Yes, so the questions there is, yeah, so how do you introduce risk management to people that are not scared of losing the data or something like that? Well, the way I do that is to say, well, that's fine, but let's just write that down. Because quite often people say, oh, yeah, I don't care about these risks. And yeah, we've agreed with that. But can you write it down? And at that point, they suddenly say, yeah, it's okay for my company to lose £100 million. And can you get that signed off by the chief executive? And all of a sudden, they change their mind. So that's what I usually find there. Get it written down. And so that practical preparation process I told you is all about documenting. And it's really about answering 2 questions. One question, have I fully understood my risks? Written them down, understood them. And secondly, do I have a plan to do something about them? And the plan can be, I'm happy to lose it. But that's fine, just write it down.